So today I'm going to talk you through some mindful mark making. My name's Augusta. So the kind of things we'll be doing today are lots of repetitive marks and looking at the way that that can be quite meditative and a way of de-stressing, and it can be something that you just keep working on. So the outcome of today is going to be a kind of sampler. So lots of different marks that are going to be printed, and then we're going to add to it with some basic stitch techniques. So we're going to use kind of upcycled and found items, so things that you have access to at home. So the tools that I'm going to make today are going to be made from just scrap pieces of paper, and then I'm going to print onto some scrap denim that I have from home. I'm also going to be using a watered down acrylic paint. You could use things like fabric paint if you've got access to that, or kind of textiles binder with some of the acrylic paint as well. So I'm going to show you some of the tools that I've been using. So I'm going to just really simply cut up some of the paper and just make some really simple little tools. So I'm going to make 4 tools in total. So the first one is just simply a kind of linear basic tool that is going to be really easy to make lots of repetitive marks. Then I'm going to make a kind of chevron shaped tool, which is just a single piece that's folded in half. I'm going to keep one piece slightly longer, and this is going to be for making strands and different kind of painterly brush strokes. And then I'm also going to make a kind of circular piece. So I'm just going to roll that up. Into a kind of straw tube. And then I'm going to tape it up. So they're just really simple, and you can make multiple tools if you want to. You can also use things like the end of a piece of a glue stick or the end of a paintbrush, so it's really kind of flexible as to what you've got hold of at home. So these are my little tools. And now I'm going to get some of my ink. So I've just used a System 3 acrylic and I've watered it down. I've then got just a lid to the paint, and I've sort of put it on top of that because that'll be easier for the kind of printing process. So I'm going to start off with my little simple kind of linear pattern. So I'm just going to dip that in the paint. And then I'm just going to start kind of layering up some print patterns. So I've used blue because it kind of contrasts with the grey background. So you basically want to pick a colour that's going to show up against the fabric that you've decided to use. And then I'm just repeating this same mark across the denim. And I'm doing sort of 2 lines that are parallel to each other and just layering them up. So I've just added a little bit onto the piece of fabric. I'm now going to do my chevron pattern, so I'm going to just get a bit more of the paint and just put it onto this flat surface. And I'm going to dip that in. So I'm just doing 2 sort of parallel lines with this. But you can also do individual kind of all over pattern. Or you could create almost like a sort of firework pattern that all comes out from the centre. So if you wanted to practice with what your pattern actually might look like, you could get a little scrap of paper on the side and just practice kind of what design you want to make. So I'm going to use the sort of circular tool now. So just dip that in and then just create like a sort of repeated pattern. So it's something that you can just create organically. You don't necessarily have to think about where the design's going to go. You can just keep adding to the piece of fabric. And again, with the bit of end of the Pritt stick. So for a bit of variation in the kind of scale of the marks. So these are some of the marks that I've created already. And then finally, I'm going to use the longer piece of paper and I'm going to just create some sort of painterly brush strokes. So some thicker ones. I'm going to dip the end into the pot and just create some stroke marks. So a kind of wave shape. So nice and organic shapes. So these are some of the marks that I've got created. So I'm just going to have a break and let these all dry off, and then we can start to look at how we might add some stitch marks into this. So now I'm going to just introduce a few stitches. So I'm going to talk through about 4 different stitches, and it's just a way of kind of using that repetition, kind of focusing on de-stressing and kind of adding to the prints that you've already got. So the first stitch I'm going to do is going to be a running stitch. So that's a really simple stitch. I've just got a few examples of different threads. So I've got some embroidery thread, I've got some really fine ribbon, and then I've got some sort of thicker wool threads. So you can use whatever you've got access to. If you kind of have an old jumper, you can unravel it. You can use bits of kind of sort of found stitched items and things like that. So I'm going to use a contrasting embroidery thread, and then I'm going to split my thread in half. So it's made up of 6 strands, and I'm going to just separate them out. So I'm going to just use 3 strands. And then I'm going to use a good sized needle. And I'm going to thread them out. And then at the end of my piece of thread, I'm just going to tie a little knot. So I've got a hoop here, which is optional. I'm going to add a hoop in, so I'm just going to focus on this kind of linear section here, and then just add my hoop. just added it in. And then I'm just going to pull it and make sure it's nice and tight in the hoop. And then I'm just going to tighten it up. Okay. So I'm going to start at the back for my running stitch, and I'm going to start just on the edge of the print. So running stitch is basically just up and down through the fabric. So starting from the back, I'm going to just give it about 0.5 centimetre, and then I'm going to go down, and then I'm going to come back about 0.5 centimetre away, and then I'm just going to repeat that. So with the running stitch, it's nice to keep it consistent, but you can also vary the stitch length. So you can do a longer stitch, depending on where you want the weight of the line to be. And you can also do shorter stitch. So I'm just going to keep repeating this, and it's something you can just keep adding to. You can vary your stitch length, and it can just be something that starts to layer up your design. So I'm just going to tie that off. So I'm going to flip over to the back of the fabric, and then I'm just going to make a little knot and then trim that off. So that's the kind of basic running stitch. I'm also going to show you a chain stitch. So I'm going to do my chain stitch. I'm going to follow the lines of some of these circular prints here. So I'm just going to remove my hoop. And then I'm going to get this section here that's got some variation in the size of the circles. So I've got some smaller circles and some larger circles. And I'm just going to put the hoop down and pull it a bit tighter. So for this, I'm going to use a contrasting kind of yellow colour. So again, I'm going to separate my threads. So I'm just using 3 strands of thread. And then tie a knot in the end of my thread again. So with the chain stitch, you start off by coming up through your fabric, and you're basically going to create a loop, go back down into the same hole that you've come out of, and then you're going to come back up, make sure you come up through the inside of the loop, and then pull it tight. So I'm just going to follow the edge of this circle, keeping the stitches at the same distance each time, so about 0.5 centimetre I'm doing them. And then I'm just going to follow the outline of the print. So with the chain stitch, the thread can kind of loop round, so you just need to make sure you're keeping it nice and flat. I'm just going to continue that. And then I'm going to come back down behind my fabric, and then I'm just going to tie a knot. So I'm just going to loop round into a previous stitch and then just tie a knot like that, and then trim it off. So now I'm going to run through a back stitch, which is a really good kind of solid line stitch. So for my back stitch, I'm going to go back to using some of this contrasting pink. I'm going to tie a knot in the end, and then I'm just going to follow the edge of this kind of organic line. So I start off by coming in through the fabric and make a small stitch down back into the fabric. You're then going to come up through the back of the fabric but leave a stitch's distance, and then come back into the previous hole. So you're just going to repeat that. So come up through the back of the fabric about a stitch's distance apart, and then back down into the fabric just to meet where the previous stitch ended. So this is a really good way of just making a kind of solid line. So I'm going to come back into the back of my fabric, and I'm going to tie a knot off there. So through the back of the thread, and just create a knot, and then cut that off there. And the final stitch I'm going to show you is a satin stitch. So this is a really good kind of fill stitch. So it's a way of kind of drawing with the thread. So it can really enhance a kind of printed pattern. So I'm going to tie a knot, and I'm going to use some of these chevron shapes. So I'm going to start off with some of these kind of firework shaped pieces. So I'm going to start at the point of the chevron, and then I'm going to go back down into the fabric, and then I'm going to come up again right next to the original stitch mark, and I'm going to just continue to kind of follow the line and draw with the stitch. So this is something that can be really layered up, and it kind of works better the more you add to it. It starts to kind of create almost like a drawing, and it's like a colouring in effect. So I'm just going to keep adding some stitch to that. So using the guidelines that I've already stitched in, I'm just going to fill inside them. So just up and down in the fabric. So you can see that's starting to kind of colour in the lines of the fabric. Then I'm going to go to the back of the fabric and then just knot it off. And trim that. So that's kind of an introduction to all the different stitches. So what I can do now is I can continue to add to it. So it's a very organic process, and it's something you can do kind of unconsciously, just keep adding and kind of layering the different stitches on top of the print. So that's everything that I had to show you. So we've learned some different print techniques and some different stitch techniques. So I've got my little samplers here. So you can keep adding to them and kind of using that mindful mark making idea and that idea of how repetition can have the kind of meditative qualities. So thank you for taking part today, and yeah, just keep adding to them.